G'day, welcome to the Agricoach Podcast. For families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the Financial Bloke. Welcome back to the Agricoach Wealth and Wisdom Podcast, the show for families who want more than just financial success. They want to grow and protect their wealth, strengthen relationships, and maintain their success across the generations. My name's Ben Law, and I'm the Financial Bloke. And today we're talking about something that doesn't get enough airtime in ag, but it's one of the biggest threats to both performance and family harmony, and that is burnout. Now, farming families are no strangers to long days, high pressure, and carrying the weight of both business and family expectations. But here's the thing. Burnout isn't just being tired. It can creep in and quietly erode your health, decision-making, relationships, and ultimately the future of your business if it is ignored. To help unpack what burnout really is, how to spot it, and what we can do to avoid or recover from it, I've invited Tanya Atkinson on the show. Tanya's story started behind the bar of her parents' pub in Quilpie at just 13 years old, where she quickly learned how to listen, mediate, and understand people. That curiosity took her into psychology studies and then into banking, where she spent more than a decade leading teams and advising thousands of businesses and agribusinesses across Queensland. She became the fixer called in to coach leaders and turn struggling branches around. Today, Tanya is the founder of Unique Management, an executive coach to family businesses and leaders, and host of the Built in the Bush podcast, which I recently starred on. She partners with clients not just to tackle the challenges today, but to help them make strategic decisions that will set them up for tomorrow. And so without further delay, let's get stuck into this. Tanya, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we've flipped the tables now because I was on your podcast a couple of months ago now, and it's a real change. How do you find it being on the other side of the table?
I know. Yes, very strange. Very, very strange. I think I much prefer to be on the other side of the microphone.
Well, funnily enough, I prefer to be on that side sometimes when it's my topic. So hopefully today this will make it a lot easier for you because I know this is all right up your alley.
I do love to talk about these topics. So yeah, let's get started.
Awesome. So we're going to be here talking about burnout today, but what I want to do before we actually start there is give everyone a bit of a sense of who you are and why you're the right person to talk about in this space, which I think will be exciting. So let's kick us off with just a little bit about your background and what brought you to the work you do today with both leaders and families. Tanya?
I think this story always has to start with when I was a toddler, going with my father on property visits when he worked for elders and talking to primary producers then. I still have memories of it and just loved it. And then working behind my family's bar as a teenager on boarding school holidays, I just learnt then that everyone has a story and everyone's story is different. And what you see on the outside is not necessarily what's going on. And we just don't know what people have been through. And from there, I went into psychology, realised I didn't want to do clinical one-on-one. And so I then I was offered my first management job. I ran the country pub out in Quilpie at the age of 20. And that really cemented it for me that people and business was what I loved. And that just getting past that first layer of what people show is where the gold and the potential is, I suppose. I went from that into banking because I was manager within a year in a regional area, and that was a branch that had the highest staff turnover in the state and had always had that. And anyway, from there, I was very lucky. Back then we went on external leadership courses, and they really invested in teaching you how to bring out the best in people. And it was actually then when I went on and did my executive coaching accreditation later, I realised that the training we did then I was in retail and banking at first, was based on executive coaching. So it was quite lucky and ironic that was where that training started. But I got sent to branches to fix them and to turn them around. And then business as well, I did the same. Then agribusiness poached me when I was in Roma to come across and do that in one of their centres. And from there, I think it really, because I'm a country girl, because my mum grew up on property and I'd always grown up going back to my grandparents, I just loved it. I loved hearing people's stories. And when you're a banker and now as an advisor or a coach, and you would know too, Ben, you get to hear behind the exterior. So you get to hear the struggles and what people went through to actually achieve where they got to. And yeah, it just opened up my eyes to how much I love doing that. And then from that, though, my family went through a really poor succession family experience, and I thought that they would never stop talking to each other, and they did. And I obviously had clients with the same, where families that I just thought would never, ever stop talking to each other, it came to succession, and these family bonds were broken and quite often irreparable. And yeah, from there, that's where the executive coaching side of it sort of took off. And then the scientific accreditations I've got through, I use Berkman and PI and a couple of other behavioural assessment tools as well. It just gave me this insight into, if we could only learn how to communicate or to understand or see what's going on beneath the surface, there's always agreement there to be found. And I suppose that's what motivates me, and what I love about doing this is seeing that moment tick where people understand someone else's point of view, or will let down the guard or the hurt for a little bit and just understand and meet each other where they are. I don't know if that makes sense. But.
No, it does. Total sense. And look, I know we're not to talk about succession today, but this all ties in with it. And I know from the research that I've read over the years and anecdotally, and I quote these figures a lot, is somewhere between 60 to 70% of the reasons families fall apart and then succession plans fail is because of a breakdown in trust and then ultimately communication. And so that's why within our high performing families community is we work so heavily on how to build trust, how to communicate, because if you can do that, you're 3/4 of the way there. We've obviously got to remember we've got to have a strategic plan. We've got to run a good business. We've got to prepare the next generation to take over, but that's the core of it. And so we talk about there's 3 pillars within a successful family, and that's well-being, wisdom, and wealth. And when you get to the well-being side, you talk to people about personal well-being, family well-being, communication, how the relationships are going. And this ties into burnout. A lot of people look at it and you go, well, that's not really important. It's more important what interest rates are doing or commodity prices are doing or what the weather's doing. And I'm like, nope. I said, all that stuff is, yep, it's important, but it's far less important when everything breaks down. And burnout is obviously a key part of that. So to get into this, because I know when I first heard the word burnout, my first reaction, Tanya, was to go, well, I don't even know what this bloody means. I'm just stressed out. I've got a lot on my plate and I'm just worn down. But it's not true. Burnout's a real thing. So do you want to give me your definition of what burnout actually is, at a very high level, and then where you see it mostly turn up in the families and the businesses that you work with?
So very contentious issue. What burnout actually is debated by people far more smarter and more well-researched than I am. But from my studies and anecdotally what I know, the difference with burnout is, and again, it's hard to tell when you're going through it necessarily, but stress, those sorts of things are normally specific episodes, and you can get some type of relief or relaxation away from them and doing the things that normally do give you that relief or relaxation. The signs of burnout tend to be when the things that used to give you that relaxation and that rest are no longer giving that to you. The 2 biggest things I would say with burnout is you feel incredibly tired with it normally, but yet you tend to be on edge. So again, this is the hard part with burnout, because depression, anxiety, burnout, stress, they all have similar features. The main thing with your burnout, though, is that you cannot get relief. If it's stress or something like that, you should be able to get relief from going. And if it's, going and playing touch football, if it's having a day out with your family, if it's going to the beach, those things should help. When those things are no longer making any difference to you, numbness is quite often a feeling that's reported. The fogginess, having trouble concentrating, putting thoughts and actions or reports together that normally wouldn't take you a lot of brain power to be able to achieve them. If you find that things that used to be quite simple to achieve, work-wise, say, are now quite a task, then again, that's a sign as well. The biggest thing is that not being able, it's the tiredness, but it's not being able to switch off would be the most common feature that I hear and see with people that is the difference between normal stress.
That sounds like every business owner I've ever met, Tanya.
Yeah. And this is the scary part is most of us are actually operating with some type of burnout and not even recognising it, which is fine to an extent.
So it sounds like it's like a chronic problem. Like, because I think about there's been times through my career, and we talked about this on my podcast, and I have with other people, is when I sold my financial advice practice, I pretty much feel that I'd burnt out at that stage and just said I'd had enough due to the pressures, etc. But it sounds like it's like a chronic condition that just doesn't go away. It's not something that you can not take a pill for, but it's like chronic pain. If you've got a headache that you can take a Panadol, 5-6 hours later, the headache's gone, woohoo, off you go with life. But it's that chronic condition that's just underlying all the time. Is that kind of what you're suggesting? In
a way, although not the chronic condition, because it is absolutely fixable and recoverable from, but it's something that will only increase over time if we continue to ignore it. I guess if you want to compare it to, we'd never, and this is what I use with clients, you would never ever expect your best tractor to go out there and work at its optimal performance without any fuel in it, without having serviced it for how long, knowing that it's got a busted radiator, whatever it might be. You can tell I'm not actually mechanically minded, but we would never, ever put a piece of machinery out there in that condition and expect it to be working at optimal performance. And I liken it to burnout is the longer we keep pushing ourselves and ignoring those symptoms and those signs that keep getting louder, the worse it is and the longer it takes to recover from it. It is always recoverable, but the longer we've been ignoring it, the longer it takes to break those patterns of behaviour.
So why is it a problem? The common statement I see from most people is, well, I just muscle through this. And that's what I did. I just muscle through it. I'm just going to double down. I'm just going to focus and I'll get through it, which is obviously the stoic way of looking things. And what many in the rural community would be seen to do is just tough it out, young fella. What's the downside to doing this?
The downside to doing it is that you end up having really severe burnout or severe medical episodes, physical ailments, mental health. It doesn't go away. So the longer we ignore it, the worse that burnout episode will look like. And it's different for clients. I can talk about mine was a week in bed and I didn't even know what it was at that stage. And I was a successful, striving person. But everyone's episode looks different. The longer you ignore it, though, the more extreme that episode will be.
It's a little bit reminds me of chronic fatigue. I've had a good friend of mine and a couple of friends of mine actually have had chronic fatigue, and it's really hard to diagnose chronic fatigue because no one person's cases are the same. The symptoms are different, the triggers are different, etc. So how would you normally see in your experience, or maybe even talk about yours if you feel comfortable enough, how do you actually see it start to show up? Tanya, I know you gave us a few little things about brain fog, etc., but how do you actually start to identify that this is happening?
The first part of it is the people closest to you will probably identify it before you will.
What will they see?
They'll see changes in you and in your engagement in particular. If it's, look, my experience personally and with clients with burnout is all work triggered or related, I suppose. But typically, so in the business world, you'll see it differently in levels of productivity or engagement. And again, that doesn't mean that we see that though and go, that person's got burnout. It could be a lot of different things, but they're just some of the signs we want to be looking out for. Personally, though, it's that engagement and it's that difference in the activities and things they're taking part in. So if they're no longer doing the activities, particularly things they used to enjoy, or it's a bit of an effort for them to get there, then that's a conversation you just want to start having.
Yeah, so a disinterest in things that would have previously, maybe not excited you, but you'd have participated in.
Yep. And particularly things that used to give you that relaxation or that rejuvenation. That's a really clear sign when those activities that used to, as I say, fill your cup back up, give you energy again, when they're no longer doing that, that's a really clear sign that to go, hey, what's going on? Something's changed.
So do you see it actually then start to impact relationships? Because obviously if you've got a farming family and someone in the family, do you find that, like I'm guessing there's some disinterest in being engaged? Is there anger? Like do you see people start to lash out more and not behave like they normally would or have the tolerance for things that they would have before?
Yeah, and again, that displays itself differently in different people. But I go back to Dr. Breno Brown's work with that, and this is something I haven't met a client yet or someone else that has gone through and recovered from burnout that doesn't resonate with this. And hers is about that unused creativity, how important that is to it, that it doesn't just go away, it metastasizes itself as shame, grief, anger. And that's a big component in the recovery of burnout that I certainly use with my clients and with myself. So it is really common that those behaviours are displayed then. And yeah, it's normally your family and your people close to you that you end up taking it out on. Well, we always do.
Yeah. Well, I know for myself, like I was definitely one of those people that knuckled down and said, I've just got to drive through this and push through this. I would pride myself on being fairly stoic, and that's my natural state, is if things get hard, is to not break, it's to double down and just muscle my way through it. And I remember when I used to do CrossFit in Brisbane, when I was down there, is it was never ever going to beat me ever, and I'd go until I'd break. And I feel like I brought that back into business. But what I noticed is my effectiveness. So I thought that I was actually increasing my productivity by doubling down, but what I was finding is I was doing far more stress, but with such lower amounts of productivity or effectiveness. So I wasn't actually getting ahead anywhere, which was a real struggle. Is that something you normally see?
Yeah, very common. And this is the other stigma that I really want to get out there, because I too was one of those. But most people that suffer from burnout are those strivers. They are the people that get in, they make stuff happen, they always find a way to get through it or to get around it. And that's probably part of the problem, is because we're so good at doing that, we're really good at ignoring the things that aren't working at the time in order to be able to get things done. And if we don't at some point along the way check in with ourselves and just make sure we're okay and we're looking after ourselves, then I think that's how burnout ends up showing up for us.
So if you're checking in, what does okay mean? Because if I looked at myself, I went back to when I was at the peak of my game in the financial advice industry, because I think I've actually got a good example here. Is my financial advice practice was going gangbusters. I had a young child who'd just been born. She was, I think, about 9 months old. We'd have 7 years of IVF to get her, so it had been a big project. We got the business up and running, employed more people. And I remember I won a national award. And I remember going down to Melbourne, flying down, standing up in front of the crowd and winning this award, 1,500 people in the room, having to get up and give a speech, giving the nice speech, and then walking down and go, I couldn't really give two hoots about this. And I remember I tossed the trophy, shall we call it, or the big plaque in the bin on the way out, and off I went back to the grindstone, back home to get back on the laptop and get more stuff done. Is that something common you see? Like, is that a sign of checking in going, that doesn't sound normal?
Well, it depends. Is that award something that previously you would have valued? And
well, historically, it would have been.
And absolutely, that's it. Yeah, and so even if it is an annual thing of checking it works differently for everyone. But I've got some clients where it's an annual thing. What do I enjoy? What makes me happy? What makes me smile? It's just a set of 5 to 10 questions that we've worked out so that they can check in once a year and go, hang on, I'm not doing anything anymore that's making me smile. I've stopped doing those things that I said I'd keep doing to make sure that I'm, staying away from burnout. That's just one of the practices that you can use. But it's about setting guardrails and boundaries.
So what do you say to people that go, I've just got to get over this hump, Tanya. We've just got this new employee come on. We've just bought the block down the road. We've just gone through the drought. We've just got to get over this little hump, and then I'll take a break and slow down. High-performing families don't sit around waiting for succession to turn into a crisis. They prepare early, 5, 10, and sometimes 15 years before anyone's talking retirement. That's what the dozen families at our last Roadmap workshop came to do, and they rated it 9.5 out of 10, with feedback like, "I finally understand where I fit. We've got structure and clarity now, and we should have done this years ago." They walked in uncertain. They walked out aligned, confident, and energised about the future. And for some, it was the first time they'd ever sat down as a family and talked about what comes next. We ran 4 Roadmap workshops this year, and every single one sold out. The most recent one was almost entirely families who were on the wait list. In 2026, I've only got capacity to run 2 of them, and they will sell out again. So if you want first crack at the seats when dates open, get on the wait list now. Join agricoach.com.au/take action. That's www.agricoach.com.au/take action. All right, let's get back to the episode.
And you do. You've got to get over the hump. The point is, though, we've got to find a way to find space for ourselves in between that, because there's always going to be a hump and there's always going to be a push. So I talk about, and I can talk about mine, I have a 90-minute self-care routine of the morning. I meditate every day. Anyone that knows me, I had have told you that 3 years ago, they would have bet their life on it that it was absolute rubbish. Actually, no, 5 years now it's been. But it's having a self-care routine. And that may be different from people. If they don't know where to start, it's 3 things you're grateful for. Even the science behind that we know changes the brain and the way that we're thinking. But it's having a self-care routine that works for you. That might be, I had one client, his meditation was AC/DC of the morning. That worked for him initially. Now he had PTSD from war and things like that. But it's what works for you initially, but you've got to make the commitment to carve out the time. So there's always going to be a push. There's always going to be something on. So then make it 5 minutes each day. Make it 10 minutes. Or make it 20 minutes at the end once a week. It's finding something that works for you, that's an agreed activity, and that's an agreed check-in time.
It does, yeah. So let's say I'm someone in business. So let's call that person Ben. And now let's say young Ben comes in and goes, "Look, what you're saying resonates with me. I don't really want to admit it because that would show weakness, I suppose. And or I'm starting to see those signs. How do I actually, like, apart from just a little bit of self-care every day, how do I actually, like, what if I wanted to take massive action and go, righto, I'm going to slay this dragon. I'm going to make sure I'm not burning out. How do I actually go about avoiding this or stopping this or reversing this, Tanya? Talk me through it.
Okay, there's no avoiding it. We've got to go through it. But so if someone came in like that, then it's about doing the work. So it's not going to be one session or one golden bullet or recipe is going to fix it, because you've got to look at how long your patterns of behaviour have led to this burnout and how long we've been ignoring what those signs are. So it just depends how serious we're at in that burnout side of it. But then it's about evaluating how our day, our weeks, our months are made up. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to change jobs, you need to change business, etc. But it's about understanding. So one of the other things that I work on with people is, again, that creativity piece. So there's 7 things that people, so meditation, exercise, diet, sleep, creativity, soul, and then X. And X can be, some people may still need medication. It may lead to, something more serious. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people may need medication just for a period. Some people may need it for longer. There is no harm in any of that either. So the X stands for anything else that's needed. But the first thing I'd start with is meditation doesn't have to, there are so many different forms of meditation. Google it, look it up. They're not silent anymore. You can start with a 1-minute meditation. Smiling Mind, if anyone's listening, that's how I started. 1 minute, I think I did for about 8 months. Exercise, it doesn't have to be hard exercise, but exercise is the only natural way we have of actually emitting the dopamine and all the rest of it. So just a walk is enough. A 10-minute walk is all it needs to be. Diet, trying to make sure that we're eating some fruit and veggies, bit of meat. Don't have to tell most of our farmers that, but just making sure that we've got some real whole foods in there. It does make a difference to it. Sleep, this is the big one. We are not heroes for being able to survive on no sleep. I mean, yes, there are times we're going to have to do it, but we would never expect our best harvester, our best truck to go out there and be operating at full capacity without the fuel, without being serviced, with broken down bits and pieces. It's the same for us. Sleep is our body, mind, soul's way to reset. We cannot function without sleep.
So how much sleep should people be getting? Is there some guidelines around that, do you feel? Because like some people say, I get 4 or 5 hours a night and I'm happy.
And it actually is a personal thing. The guidelines still say 6 to 8 hours, but there's plenty of research out there to show that some people function really well on that 6 or slightly under that 6. Some people actually need slightly over that 8. You really need to gauge it. It's a personal thing. For that, you know yourself whether you're functioning well, whether your brain's working at normal capacity. Guidelines still are 6 to 8 hours though.
Yep. And I suppose the answer probably is if you are struggling, more's probably better. You know, if you're getting 6 hours, go a little bit higher.
Yeah. If you find that you're relating to any of the symptoms or the things that we've spoken about, then yeah, first thing is try and get a bit more sleep.
Perfect. Yep. Sorry. So go on to the next.
So creativity. So this is one again, going back to Dr. Brown's research. Do something that there is no end goal for. So whether it is colouring in a book, whether it is your gardening, whether it is journaling, it is something that 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is, something that has absolutely no end goal whatsoever. I went and did a paint and sip class. I threw the painting out as soon as I finished it. I'm not a painter. It's about doing something that you're not connected to the end result. Something that lets your mind just wander. Really important for most of us drivers because most of us do not have a creative outlet.
Is that about, because most, like for me, I'll use me as an example. I'll throw me under the bus. I really struggle with the creativity side because I'm naturally a creative person. So I do creative stuff within my business, but just doing something for something's sake seems like a real waste of time. It's like and then there's a guilt kicks in. So there's jobs to be done and I'm sitting around painting a picture on the back veranda or, I don't know, knitting a bookmark. It naturally, for most people, it's like, I just don't have time to sit around and just do something useless. But that's probably the reason to do it, is it not?
Yeah, but don't choose something that makes you feel, it's got to be something you enjoy doing. So particularly for men, it might be actually building something or on the tools if that's not what they normally do of a day. So there might still be some purpose at the end, but you cannot be performing it for a specific end goal. So if it's building or constructing something, they'll go and work on it when it suits them. So there's no time frame, there's no urgency.
Yeah, there's got to be fun attached to it so that it's, rather than it being a job that I need to get done, like, oh no, we've been talking about building a chook pen for the last 10 years. I better go out and do that, and that's my creativity.
Yeah, with no end goal on it.
Okay. And so that again is about breaking that habit, is it? Is that like, so actually giving yourself permission not to just be locked into business or work or whatever it is 100% of the time?
Well, it's trying to give yourself permission and room to remember how to be, to not be thinking about, I've got to get this done, this is happening for this reason, to just get lost in the actions of what you're doing, which is why it normally is some type of manual task or activity. And it can be something that you already do, but you may find that you haven't done it for a long time. It's gone to the wayside because of work or business or whatever it is. But it's something that there's no specific end goal for it. It is just something that you fit in, that you enjoy doing with your hands.
And so the typical type A personality would go, that's a time waster. That's not actually productive. But I know that's a terrible label to put on it, but that's probably what most people would say, or that's what I would have said anyhow.
Yeah. And that's part of why it can be actually constructing, because I'm just thinking back to clients. Yeah, I think nearly all of my male clients, it's normally building something but there is no time frame on it. And
like you said, toss it in the bin at the end.
yeah, I don't know if any of them would. They have all built something by the end of it now that I'm thinking about it. But there wasn't that urgency on it. It wasn't the business. It wasn't this has to be done. It was, okay, this is going to be what I do in my free time or for my self-care time.
Perfect. Go for it. Excellent. Number 6, soul. That's an interesting one.
It's just giving back. It's making sure that we're doing something for someone else. The research and the science behind what that does to us by actually giving back and doing something else for other people is incredibly powerful. That's a really important part of it as well. And it doesn't have to be every day. It can be once a month. It can be once a week. It doesn't have to be joining a not-for-profit. It can be just going and helping out the local sports day, local footy club that needs help on the gate. You know, it's just doing something for someone else that has no return for you.
It's interesting. I had a family, we did a family meeting with yesterday, and with the whole family, the next generation of mum and dad, and they'd actually done some work with a camp draft, and they'd gone in and helped out for 2 days, and they said the conversation went pretty much along the lines of, oh no, we're so far behind now because we had all these jobs to do back on farm, and they're running a pretty big operation. And they said, but we feel great. Because they said we went out, we gave back, we saw our friends, we had some fun. And the comment from Dad was basically, we haven't done it for ages because I just haven't felt like I wanted to. Like I just didn't feel any drive. And I thought that was really telling. And you could see that then sort of filtering down to the next generation. Like they didn't actually understand the concept, but it's all of a sudden building in that, hey, community is important and we need to give back. And my comment to them, which is what I heard from Tony Robbins years ago, was it's very hard to be depressed or anxious if you're actually giving to someone else.
Yeah, very true. And the science is there to back it up that, yeah, giving to someone else actually makes us happier than us receiving.
Yep. Awesome. And then X.
So X is anything else that personally might be, everyone's individual and everyone has different needs. So X just covers off anything else. Predominantly that's if medication or something like that's required.
So, okay. So when you see someone like this and they see this happening in their family, so they see their wife or their husband or their brother or their sister starting to display these sort of symptoms, shall we say, and they see that it's starting to impact family, themselves, the business even, because it does impact the business. How do you actually go about raising this with someone who's not aware? Because again, I'll throw myself in this. If my wife had come up to me and said, hey, I think you're burnt out, or I think you're burning the candle at the both ends, which she wasn't in a space to do because we had a young child, but I probably would have just brushed it off. So how do you actually approach someone that's unaware of this?
Yeah, that's not an easy one. And I'm the same, Ben. I can say my own experience. If anyone had have told me, I probably would have bitten their head off because I was in the middle of burnout. It's got to be, I would say that the person that has probably the closest relationship with them would be the best person to raise it. The first thing is, it's only ever an observation. We can't ever know that someone has burnout or judge or assess what anyone else is going through. But it'd be having a conversation, and really important to try and separate the person from the behaviour. So it's just about, hey, I'm just a bit concerned, just notice that these things don't seem to be, if it's say that you used to go and do a family thing or they used to play sport, whatever it is, you'd bring up whatever that example is. Just want to know what's going on. Is everything all right? You're trying to have a conversation along those lines. Is the things that are no longer, the things that have changed, the behaviours that have changed and the activities, and that's what you want to talk about. So you're not making an assessment or assumption about them or their condition. It's talking about what some of those activities and behaviours are that have changed, and just trying to understand why and let them know that you are a bit concerned.
And then how do you get them to start to take action? Because obviously it's great to point it out like an intervention. We've noticed this is what it is. And my guess would be three options would be to say, yes, I am feeling like that. Let's do something about it. Number 2 would be to go, I don't know what you're talking about, you dingbat. And the third one would be to lash out and suggest, I don't have the time. Like, how do we actually what's the next step? Like, how do we actually get them to almost have that paradigm shift where they go, yep, let's do something about this?
I'm sorry to say the answer to that is that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's about supporting them and not judging them and not letting up. So if it's affecting personally, say, then if those conversations aren't working, if they're shutting you out or getting argumentative about it, then I'd be encouraging to try and book them in with someone or booking both of you in. Sometimes that's a little bit less confronting initially, and the conversation can just be about the impact or the dynamics between the couple and the family and the business end. Sometimes that's how we start with things, and then quite often they'll agree to one-on-one sessions from there. Normally if you can get them to the right person one-on-one, it's normally very easy after that, because there's still so much stigma associated with it. And I suppose the other thing I'd really like listeners to know is something that made this highlighted how much of an issue this is for us. I would even say, the COVID was a pandemic, but burnout was the epidemic that was going on before it, and I think was exacerbated during it and now after it. It is happening in every industry. And after having a contract where I was coaching SAS soldiers and some of the toughest and most accomplished people we'd ever know, burnout does not discriminate. It is in every industry, and it happens, I think, more so to the most successful people and the people that you would least expect it to be going through.
Why?
I think there's a lot with the personality type. A lot of successful people are those strivers. They make stuff happen, always find a way to get over that obstacle, to knuckle down, to get through it. And quite often that happens at the expense of ourselves. And I guess there's a point where, just like machinery does, your body, mind and soul says, hey, I'm completely empty. And something's got to change.
There's got to be a trigger, essentially, in most cases, to cause people to take the action to go. Like with a tractor, you'll see a blown head gasket. You get in the tractor, there's a blown head gasket, there's a hydraulic hose is blown, I don't know, the radiator's got a hole in it. So you go, oh, we need to fix this. But as humans, I'm guessing for most people, something's got to break.
Yeah. And so, as you said earlier, initially it's that the anger outburst, difference in their behaviour and showing sort of stressed behaviour and not their usual selves. But then burnout episodes, can be very visible breakdowns. They can look like huge outbursts. They can look like people just not being able to get out of bed one day for a period. They can look like uncontrollable sobbing, like when it's not listened to and people keep pushing through, that episode is as noticeable as a blown tyre on a tractor.
Yeah, well, you notice the signs, the temperature gauge goes up on the tractor, and then it's not until the temperature gets high enough that you see the radiator blow or a hose blows, and then that's when you've got the real symptoms.
Yep.
Yeah, well, for me, and I've shared this a number of times on the podcast, I had a heart scare. And for me, I remember I was at the top of my game and I was stressed. Don't get me wrong. Like, I was under some immense pressure and I thought I was flying. Like, I thought I was just in the zone. I would have called it flow at that stage, but my body was telling me something different. And the trigger for me, it was really weird. I had the heart scare and I didn't have a heart attack. It was just a scare. And the cardiologist said to me, he said, Ben, if you don't turn this stuff around, you're not going to die tomorrow, but in 10 or 20 years, you're going to suffer the same fate that some of your family members did with problems. And I remember after a week of knocking the wind out of my sails, I turned around and went to myself, I started a bargain and I went, oh, you know what? I can turn this around. I'll just do a little less. I'll reduce things. And then I remember what happened to me, which was the final trigger, was I was having dinner with Sarah and Sophie. Sophie's my daughter. And the phone rang and it was one of my mates, and I hung up, and then he rang again. And I'm like, oh, geez, it's dinner time. And then he rang again. So I picked it up, went out into the laundry and was like, mate, what's going on? And he said, oh, Joe down the road that we know within business. Yeah, he says, he just dropped dead. Same age kids, had a heart attack. He went to the same hospital as I went to, except when I had my scare, I was home the next morning, saw the cardiologist, all okay. He died. And his wife got a call. And I remember I walked out and saw my daughter and went, holy shit, I don't want this. I don't want to leave her without a father. And that was the real motivation for me to do something. But I'll be blunt, if I hadn't had that bigger sledgehammer, it was almost like the universe said to me once, here's warning number 1, Benjamin. Here's warning number 2. I don't know what warning number 3 would be, but luckily I was smart enough at number 2 to make some changes. And I took massive action, and that was to sell my business, retire from financial advice, and say, this just isn't the path for me anymore. But I mean, a lot of people, they don't get that, I suppose you'd say, message from the universe twice. They have a heart attack, they have a meltdown, all their relationships break down, divorce, partnership split ups in the business goes broke, physically something happens in our body like cancer, stroke, heart attack. Like, we don't necessarily get multiple messages.
No. And I actually now, I think we're the lucky ones if we get that message loud and clear. At the time, it doesn't feel like it. But I actually think now we are the lucky ones, because we have no choice but to stop and look and make sure we do things differently. Some people don't get that, you're right, and it's why it's even more important to try and check in. But you would see it yourself. I quite often see it come out in succession planning.
Yep.
Because the striving has been to build this legacy for the family, and they've done that, they've been successful. And it gets to succession right at the end. There's been no discussions or real communication beforehand. And then all of a sudden there's conflict and people don't agree on what's happening. And I've seen many times where the patriarch or the matriarch, goes through some type of burnout then, because everything they felt that they'd built and strived for was not what they were seeing play out the way they had expected.
And that's the high level of stress that's hitting them, that they're seeing their dreams and everything they've worked for just crumble.
Yeah, or how it feels at that time. Yes. Yeah, so it can show itself in many, many different ways, but it is always recoverable.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It sounds like you need support though. Like, it's very, very difficult just to do it on your own. And I'm guessing that's counselling, coaching, those sorts of things. Is that right?
Yeah, well, you need to break behaviour patterns. You don't have to change your life, but you need to break some of those behaviour patterns that led you there, and you need to instill some behaviour patterns that make sure that you check in with yourself and look after yourself. Because at the end of the day, those of us that suffer from burnout are not good at checking in on ourselves naturally, and it's something that we have to work out for the rest of our lives, but it's still doable and achievable.
It's interesting, Tanya, just to tie this off is, as I said, the 3 pillars of a high-performing family is well-being, wisdom and wealth. And we teach our families in our community that well-being is just as important as growing, protecting and transitioning wealth. And sometimes being able to have the language and the knowledge of the importance of looking after your well-being, the well-being of your family and friends, and the well-being of your relationships is critical. And so it's amazing the amount of times, and I can think of a meeting we had not a lot while ago with a family where, the comment from mum, who's pretty wise, and she goes, look, as a family, we're smashing it out of the park on the wisdom side. We're building the wisdom, we're transitioning it to the next generation. The wealth side, like, we've doubled our wealth, we're profitable, we've scaled up, like, everything's going fantastic. And she just looked at them, she goes, but our well-being is shit. We're working our guts out, we're not looking after each other. We keep talking about how it's important, but we don't follow through. And it was interesting looking around and the males particularly, and I know this is probably more of a male experience would be my guess, not to take away that women don't suffer from it as well, but I'm guessing men would be less likely to look at it. And it was interesting when looking around the table at the men and me being able to say, guys, you've got to understand that your well-being and your family relationship well-being is going to make or break you. You can build all this wealth, you can build all this scale and, thousands of head of cattle and thousands of acres and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of assets. But at the end of the day, If you're dead, it's no good. If you're chronically unwell, it's no good. And if your family relationships break down, which are ultimately where it all ends up, so it was all for naught. So you can put trusts and companies and have your leverage right and have all the right advisors around, and this is your Achilles heel. So ignore it at your peril. And to the males in the room, to their defense, they went, yeah, you're right. We just don't see it. And I think we have to change the narrative around that this isn't a nice to have. If you want to be a high-performing family or be intergenerationally successful or personally successful, this is part of the recipe. You know, you've got to grow your wealth. You've got to protect it. And part of that protecting is protecting the human capital within your business.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's just interesting there too. What it was that really pointed out for me and also made me make the change was I realised that my kids, what they are watching is what they aspire to or expect as normal. Once it was made clear to me that I was demonstrating and showing my kids that this is a successful career in life when I felt dead and numb on the inside, that's what made me go, hang on, if I saw my kids living a life feeling like this, I would feel like a failure as a parent. So for me, that was it's different for everyone, but yeah, you've just got to find what it is. We all have to look after ourselves because some people don't get even a second warning.
No. And it's the stories we tell ourselves. And for me, it was the one that resonated in my head was the family history. And I had a podcast interview yesterday with Lael Stone, which I'm not sure if it'll come out before this one or after, Tanya, but it was really powerful around stories. But the story I told myself is if I wasn't working, I was a lazy bastard. And if I'm a lazy bastard, I'm not valuable and I won't be loved.
That's one of my mantras. One of my wounds I have to work on too. To be valuable, I have to be working.
Yep. And I think that's endemic in the rural community because I've used this example a couple of times. There was a guy around where I grew up that got put in jail for stealing cattle and a cattle duffer, and obviously a dastardly character who was stealing cattle from his neighbours, not the sort of person you want to hang around. And then I heard one of Dad's mates say once, let's call him Johnny. Johnny got put in jail for cattle duffing, which makes him a bastard, but geez, he can work hard, that fella. And it was almost like the working hard kind of balanced out the fact that he was a thief and stole from his friends. And I remember looking at it going, isn't that interesting? Like thief in jail, and because he's a hard worker, he must be better off. And that's the story. And so for me, it's very, very strong in me is you work hard. That work ethic has been instilled with an iron rod. And I've had to work, like I'm sure you have and a lot of people have, is to accept the fact that, taking some time off and doing those 7 steps, like you mentioned, and I do some of them better than others, I have to say, is part of the whole process. Like that's what has to be done to be successful and trying to change those stories.
Yeah. And it doesn't stop you working hard. So looking after yourself and working hard go hand in hand.
Well, you can't work hard unless you are looking after yourself because, like you said, your number one piece of machinery on a property is a tractor. If you don't service that tractor or look after it, it's not going to be able to work when you need it to. And that's why most cropping families spend a shit ton of money and a lot of time in the off-season servicing all their machinery. So when it came to time to roll out those cotton pickers or those harvesters or those tractors, it's tickety-boo. But for themselves, they never do that.
I know. Imagine if they spent just a fraction. Imagine if business owners, I'd love to know actually how much we spend on anyone listening, how much are you spending on your own development for yourself within the business compared to servicing and maintaining everything else?
I reckon it'd be a fraction, if any.
Not that I'm saying it has to be anywhere near that amount. But a fraction would be a good start.
Awesome. Well, Tanya, that's been fantastic. Can you just give us a quick rundown on what you do, how people can find you online? And then I'm just going to tick off with our last quick question I like to ask everyone.
So executive coach specialising in growth and transition for people and their businesses. And you can find me www.uniquemanagement.com.au, and then all the handles are on there for the social medias.
Perfect. We'll put you in the show notes, all those details as well for people. So is there anything finally you'd like to leave us with before we get into our last question?
It's just making that commitment to, I'd say, guardrails and non-negotiables. Work out what the changes need to be and make a commitment to yourself, the same as you would if it was your solicitor, a banker, an external stakeholder.
Perfect. I love it. Now, last question. I throw you in a time machine, Ben's time machine. You jump in, you go back to, say, when Tanya was in her 20s at some stage. What's the one piece of advice you'd sit her down and say, Tanya, this is what I think you should do? What's that bit of advice you give yourself?
Oh, God. I've thought about this and I'm still struggling. I think it would be, and this ties into our topic, that you will finally get the tortoise and the hare analogy and you'll actually agree with it.
It's a slow and steady wins the race, hey?
I remember it even in my 20s struggling with that and thinking, this makes no sense. This is the stupidest analogy I've ever. And now I get it and I try to live it. Try being the operative word. I'm still a striver.
Well, you know what Yoda says, and I'm showing my age, either you will or you won't. It's not to try.
I'm not a Star Wars.
As I said, showing my age.
I trust you, Ben. I just can't help you on that.
Perfect. Well, right, Tanya. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on today. I think this is a great topic we need to talk about. I know you're really, really passionate about it, and that's what we connected on. And my story is pretty much, in a similar vein to yours. So I just want to say thank you very much. And for anyone listening out there, if you're suffering from burnout, go get some help and take some action, because I can guarantee you it will have a personal toll and a family toll. But far more importantly, if you're the sort of person that I think you are, it will have a business toll. You will never, ever reach your potential.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on and for this topic, Ben. It's so important. People just need to realise that I would say about 80% of successful people are suffering some type of burnout. So let's get rid of the stigma, because it doesn't stop you being successful. And when you work on it, it allows you to be even more successful in every part of your life.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, Tanya, thank you very much. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
Well, that was a lot to take in. And so just before you run off, I want to give you a few extra things. I think this is a conversation that really needs to be had. And I want to reconfirm that this isn't a weakness. It's just a signal that things aren't quite balanced or going right. And you can ignore it. And you might be able to ignore it for a long time, but eventually it's going to cost you dearly. But if you can face it head on, it can actually be a turning point towards building a healthier, more sustainable family and a stronger business. Now, there was just 7 things I want to reiterate or re-highlight. So if you can grab a pen and paper that Tanya suggested. And the first thing was, she said, meditation. So just taking a couple of minutes in the morning, and for some people they can do a lot more than others, and just meditate to try and quiet your mind down and slow your autonomous nervous system down. Number 2 is exercise. I know most farming families are out doing stuff on the land, but getting some exercise that really is good for your body. For some of you, it's cardio. For some of you, it's weights. For others, it's stretching and flexibility like yoga. But work out what works for you and allocating some time for that. Number 3, she said diet. Get rid of the processed foods. Try and eat better quality food more often. Number 4 was sleep. Make sure you prioritize that. If you're feeling run down or burnt out, start to build your sleep up. Number 5 was creativity, which I thought was really interesting. So find something you can do that's creative, that has no end goal. So it's not just another business thing to do or job around the house that's going to be important that needs to be done. Something that you can just essentially throw away at the end. But remembering that maybe for some of you, getting those jobs done around the house, like building something, could be really valuable. Just think about it and make sure it's not just a job. Number 6, she said soul. And again, that was basically giving back to the community, because as I mentioned, it's very hard to be anxious, depressed, or wound up, or not be able to get a good balance on life when you're giving to help others. And number 7, she said, was X. That's the letter X. Something else that'll work for you. For some people, as she mentioned, it could be medication, it could be psychological help, it could be coaching, it could be mentoring, it could be a holiday. I don't know. But if it is a medical intervention, make sure you go to a specialist. Make sure you go see someone who's qualified in that area. So that's it for today. I hope this episode hit home for you. And if you could really share it with another farming family that might need to hear it, that would be amazing. And if you want to know more about what we do at Agricoach, go to agricoach.com.au. And until next time, I'm Ben Law, I'm the financial bloke. And remember, it's more important who you are than what you've got. I'll see you next time.